Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. The mic's working now. So I'm Aloysius. I'm a senior editor at CNET, and today we'll be talking about the Internet of Things, which how many of you have heard of before? If you have, put down your hands. Okay, everyone has heard of it. Good. So the Internet of Things is basically, gathering data, sharing of data at the very basic level. From sensors in the toilet to detect if you're in the toilet, to smart homes, or even flood sensors. So it's a very interesting world as we move to the future where everything is going to be interconnected. And so joining me today are these bunch of panelists who will now introduce themselves, please.
All right, thank you, Aloysius. So my name is Boye Vanell. I am from BAE Systems Applied Intelligence. Mainly, we are focusing on the cybersecurity aspects of as when things are getting more and more interconnected in the world.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna Reijgersberg, and I work for Philips Lighting, and I'm responsible for everything IoT and digital for all the lighting architectures in Asia Pacific. So, for example, like Hue in the consumer space, as well as various professional IoT space. Next to you.
Hi, my name is Zikin. I am the Deputy Commissioner in the Personal Data Protection Commission. You probably would have read about the activity we do in enforcing the Personal Data Protection Act. But one of the things that we also keep an eye out on is for developments in technology. IoT is one area that we keep very a close watch on, mainly to see whether the policies and guidelines that we have in place are able to keep up with the development of technology, whether we are able to clarify our policies and guidelines to enable the adoption of new technology, and also to ensure that the personal data of consumers are properly safeguarded in this whole process.
Right. Hi everybody, my name is David Siah. I work for a cybersecurity company called Trend Micro. It is a company that focuses on cybersecurity products, services, and intelligence through the use of machine learning, primarily to combat cybercrime.
All right, so thank you guys for the introduction. As you can see, we have a wide range of expertise here, so let's get started. First question is obviously, what is IoT to you, and why should care? Do you want to start, Boye?
Yeah. Well, so if I started sort of from a personal perspective, I'm quite excited about IoT in general. I like the fact that everything I do is much more easy for me. I've started paying with my watch, and at home I've just learned I need to upgrade all my light bulbs as well, and I can start interconnecting my home and run everything in a much more simple way. I'm quite excited walking around the hall out there and seeing all the young companies and all the startups and all the things they're building at the moment.
Right.
It's very exciting, yeah.
How about you, Joanna?
Well, I definitely think that for Internet of Things, it's basically connecting points, which previously wasn't connected to the internet, to the internet. So previously, I think one of the first few things on the consumer space was this little toy called number tags. I'm not sure if many of you have heard of it before. This is almost 5+ years ago, or maybe even 10. And right now, you see so many other applications, all these different sensors, they're all collecting all this different data, whether it's the consumer space or the professional space. And the key thing is, what do we do with all this data? So these data points are, of course, what he has said, being pushed to the cloud, and then using either machine learning, big data analytics. We perform different applications or analytics on this to actually give back very useful, meaningful data and use cases for the consumer space.
Right.
So yeah, it's a different world out there, and I think we're just at the beginning.
It's a very wide range of
wide.
stuff that you're interested in. And you mentioned just now, Zikin, that about how personal data is something. How is that with IoT? Because we collect all that data. What are we doing with it? How is our privacy protected?
Well, I think for the Internet of Things, we need to take a look at how data is being collected. I think one of the things that we need to understand more, and we are probably carrying one device like that on us all the time, is that there are a lot of sensors now in your smartwatch, in your smartphone, and it's continuously collecting information about you. you install an app or you wear a Fitbit, it is actually sending data about you to the cloud, right? And it knows, the service provider knows a lot about your behavior, your pattern, where you are going, and what you're doing. Now, information, personal data like this on its own is neutral, right? So what happens? On the one hand, of course, we want companies who are based here to be able to make use of data to improve services, to provide good services for the benefit of consumers, for the benefit of their customers. On the other hand, of course, we don't want behavior that will cause the company to lose customers or damage the reputation of Singapore as a hub for this kind of companies, right? So it's really striking that right balance and also ensuring the consumers, as they are using these new devices, as they enjoy the new technology, become aware of the risk, aware of what they can do to safeguard themselves when they go online, when they are making use of these devices. So there are many moving pieces that we need to try to ensure that they all head in the same direction. So, to us, those are the challenges. And I think that one of the foremost challenge really is this thing about do we really understand that consent form that we take off, the consent clause that we take off when we are making use of these devices. We may understand that, yes, it is monitoring my steps, so it can tell me whether I've hit my 10,000 steps a day, right? But are we fully aware of what else the data is used for? We may not be. We may not be fully aware. So it's really getting companies to be open, transparent, communicate with the customers properly, inform them, have customers being aware of what they are signing up to, being conscious about the service provider that they choose to use, the device provider that they choose to use, to be aware when they make that choice.
Okay, thank you. And David, let's talk about IoT, and you do a Trend Micro. So, what is IoT to you personally and to your company as well?
Right. Okay. So, both personally and to the company, in our capacity as a cyber security provider as well as a defender against internet-based threats, I think IoT presents two dimensions of topics that is worth discussing. The first is prevalence, and the second is scale. Right. In terms of prevalence, it means that, what we have every day needs to be defended as more and more IoT applications have been developed. As you just take a walk out in the exhibit area, you would see more and more new applications leveraging on IoT, meaning there will be a larger digital footprint to secure. And the second one is on scale, meaning that there will be a lot more IoT devices out there that will be subject to cybercrime, that will be subject to ransomware, and on top of defending those, you also have to be mindful that such IoT devices can be hijacked to be part of what we call a zombie botnet, meaning they could be hijacked to be used for a nefarious purpose. So today, if we were to have a botnet, right, which is a cyber term for a hacker taking command of devices, you can now take command of every CCTV camera out there, which is connected to the internet. Hackers can now have the option to take command of all the smart TVs, and with this hundreds of thousands or millions of devices, they could launch a concerted attack through them on their targeted victims.
Okay, that sounds really scary, right? I mean, I've read reports on hackers taking over fridges, and because you're not the only security guy here, Boye, do you have anything to add on to that?
That is one of my main favorite topics, actually. And you said we only had 40 minutes, so I'll try and keep it short.
We will try to keep it short.
So what the real risk here is, and I don't think it's sort of from a personal data protection perspective. I think it's more at a national level and at a national scale. What harm does it cause when an IoT device is getting a hostile takeover and being used to put down certain infrastructure. So let's assume that SP power would be put down and there would be no power in Singapore for just 1 hour. What would be the consequence of that?
Yeah, it's scary.
And that's very critical. So and IoT devices, as they are being, there is a wider range of these out there. They are also becoming more and more cheap technology. Then as the technology becomes cheaper, it doesn't mean that it actually is more secure. It's actually quite the opposite. So an unsecure IoT device is actually prone to exactly what is just being mentioned here.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you would take DNS servers down in a CSP infrastructure, and there's just multiple ways here. So there is a risk and there's an exposure, and that needs to be addressed. It's both a privacy matter, but it's also a security matter.
Well, I guess in a way, Joanna, do you have anything to add? Because you do lighting systems where we have smart lighting systems using the Zigbee platform. So what's the security risk from that?
Okay, so let me take one example. So we have an architecture called Power over Ethernet, which basically means that in a professional office space, the luminaires are actually connected with a Cat5 cable, and that is actually connected to the internet. Of course, there's a different architecture to that. So many of my customers actually say, what if, right, someone goes in there and hacks through your PoE switches, your distribution switches, and then, there's a whole security breakdown. And of course, you're on the newspaper because, you bought the system. Now, the thing is, we always work with the proper IT providers with this. We do, we put in the correct firewalls, and we also, we put in different VLANs, which is logically addressed. So it actually separates the lighting network away from the IT network. I think these guys also can comment further on that. And, there's more authentication protocols in which we actually put in the system. I can tell you for certain, nothing is 100% secure.
Which is the next question.
Yeah.
How secure are our IoT networks
Yeah.
currently? Are they vulnerable? Are they secure? Yes, no,
I don't think anyone would stand up and say, yeah, it's 100% secure and it's definitely fine to use, don't worry about it. We have to worry about it, right? But we also have to think about the reason why this event is going on, right? It's about innovation. I'm impressed about all the young people out there who actually want to build new things. What they need at the moment, I think, is a bit of guidance around that, and I'm sure that's what you were aiming to do as well, is to try to steer them in the right direction of saying, think security, don't go for the cheapest devices because they are not as safe as you might want them to be. So you might save a few dollars over there, but it's going to cost you when you have a data breach.
Yes, I think this is something Zikin mentioned just now when we were having a chat at the site. Do you want to elaborate on your personal experience on that?
Well, actually, I was going to just add on to say that on the one hand, I think consumers need to be savvy in picking the device manufacturer that they are buying from. Cheap isn't always the best, right? You have to be savvy consumers. But on the other hand, I think what the PDPC would like to do is also to work with companies to establish standards, right? One of the things that we are promoting is data protection by design. We work in partnership with cybersecurity agencies, CSA, and they are also talking about cybersecurity by design. Cybersecurity, protection, data protection, there is a huge area of overlap. And in this area of IoT devices, and when we're talking about designing online services and connected devices, it is much better to have at the design stage, right? Baked into your design, security concerns, protection concerns, have it baked in there. So design the architecture properly, then you know that the level of security is going to be higher. It's not going to be perfect, but at least you know that companies with this kind of good practices are probably more aware of the risk, are probably taking a lot more care about what they're doing, and your data is probably a lot more secure with them than any other guy.
Right. So we should start the design right at the start when we're looking. Are you guys doing that, for Philips?
Yes, definitely. And I also like the fact that both of you said cheap is not always the best.
So David, I think we spoke before on machine learning in IoT and stuff. Can you maybe talk more about that? How does it translate, and we can see how it goes?
Yeah, I guess if you look at artificial intelligence or machine learning per se, I think there are two angles to look at it. Can the hackers use machine learning, right, to hack into IoT devices? Or from us, in the perspective of a user, can we use machine learning to defend? I think the answer to the first question is that I think hackers today are very sophisticated, but they do not need the use of, they do not need to use machine learning to just hack into any devices, because tools exist for them to build what we call obfuscated or polymorphic malware, which actually could not be detected using our existing technologies. So we have to take one step ahead, jump one step ahead and embrace machine learning, artificial intelligence in order to identify patterns of malicious behavior. And that's more important now that we have a lot more, I mentioned two things, right? Prevalence and scale in the use of computing devices. So if you look at IoT prevalence, for example, a watch now is a computing device. A refrigerator is a computing device. So how do we sense, right, the amount of data that's been transacted between your watch at home, through your house router, to your fridge, through your smart TV, right? And those are what we are looking at it nowadays from the perspective of a cyber defender. We have been securing corporate networks like forever, but do we need to take the kind of mindset, that kind of technology, and translate it in a consumer environment? Do we need to build cyber defense into the home now that every other device is now connected onto the internet?
So do we?
I guess it's a rhetorical question, but I would also feel that today, there is a lot of resistance towards doing that. Take, for example, maybe in the audience, right? And I know this is a challenge, right, to get a response because I was observing the previous panel. How many of us actually do have CCTV cameras or IP cameras installed at home? Can I have a show of hands? Right. And for those of you who put up their hands, or even for those of you who did not put up their hands, right, did you ever change the password of the CCTV camera before it was delivered to you, or even after it was delivered to you?
I'm going to ask, was there even a password?
Yeah. So that's the thing, right? It becomes a rhetorical question, and that was what happened just a couple of months ago. There is a campaign using a malicious software called Mirai, M-I-R-A-I, Mirai, right? It is a malware, and it specifically looks for IoT devices, especially CCTV cameras. It takes control of those CCTV cameras and makes use of the computing power in the CCTV cameras to launch attacks on other victims. So this is what I am looking at. We are not talking about forecasting into the future. We're talking about the present, right? Just a simple thing like the IP cameras, right? Today we don't secure it. And using a combination of 60 user IDs and passwords, we can guess almost every default camera access out there.
Okay, that sounds really scary, to be honest. Okay, we're running a little quick on time, so let's move on to data. The data collected by IoT devices, what sort of insights can we get from the data? And, I guess for Zikin is how, as we go along, but Zikin will probably want to answer more about the data privacy as well. But let's start with Boye. What do you think, what sort of insights can you get from IoT devices from a security perspective?
So any data that's stored has some kind of commercial value, but any data that is being stored has also been derived from an access point that actually links you back to an individual. So there is some kind of exposure. And again, it comes to the understanding on how we actually share our data, the terms and conditions we sort of accept and sign up to when we use services, we use Facebook, we use Google, all of those things. There's a lot of information happening in that aspect that we actually not really are aware of. And when certain businesses try to take that and then store that in a cloud, there is again, you come back to that risk of exposure of that data. The privacy point, I won't touch on that. There's different expertise, but fundamentally it is about how do we make sure we understand the data that we share? It's about cyber as a private person. Should you care about? Yes, you should care about it. But there is an element around general cyber hygiene and awareness that also links back to how well is the system, how well are people educated, and how well do they actually understand the risks they're exposed to.
Okay. And for Philips, what do you do with all the metadata that you collect from your sensors, from your smart lighting? What do you do with that? How do you use that data?
Okay, let me explain one of the architectures. So we have a system called indoor positioning, and last year we are also in the still process of doing this indoor positioning pilot with Capital M. So essentially, using the phone, you can actually go around the mall, and it tells you where you are. So using that, it can also potentially push in coupons to you. Potentially, you know, if it knows your preferences, let's say if you like to go Burger King, maybe McDonald's can like push extra coupons, so to try to attract you to another fast food place. So then the question, you know, also goes about, are you willing to give off and tick off the conditions, the T&C of this, so that you get additional benefits to it? You know, when we start to think of how this data can actually provide value to you, and you think, hey, you know, if I'm getting pushed all this relevant data, then maybe the question is, yeah, probably I would sacrifice my data of how I'm walking through the mall, for example. But of course, you know, in this case, we do adhere to many of the data privacy laws because, you know, Philips is still a Dutch company. In Europe, they are very stringent about it. So we make sure we don't store any data. But then, for example, in a mall, if you download a shopping mall's app and you tick and you enter in all your details, basically they already store your data. In fact, these days when I look at all these apps, some of them even like, you know, ask you click if you allow them to track your data in the mall with all these beacons and stuff.
And so this is all being tracked through your smart lighting systems installed in the mall, right?
This is actually tracked in the mobile phone. We try to separate ourselves from the mall.
That means your location based on the lighting or where you're moving.
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay, that's how it works. Okay, interesting. So I guess it's about consent again, and I think it's quite an interesting topic because you mentioned about reverse consent. Do you want to maybe share a little more what you think about that?
Well, actually, before I talk about consent, which is always a challenge when you are talking about sensor-based IoT devices, actually, I just want to go back and ask ourselves a more fundamental question. We talk about what can we do with the data, right? The question that in my former life as an IT manager, I asked my guys when they design system is, why are you collecting so much data? The temptation is just to collect because I can populate a few more data fields for you to fill up. The sensor can detect these other things. Why don't I just collect it just in case, right? The temptation is always there, but practically speaking, 9 times out of 10, even though you've collected a lot of information, if you don't know what you're going to do with it, it's just going to sit there. It's just going to sit there. It's just going to complicate your life cycle management. It's just going to complicate your IT management. So be very clear about what you want to do, especially for this audience when we are designing systems and we are designing apps and devices. Be clear about what you want to do, what you anticipate the data will be used for. Have an idea of what it can be used for before you start collecting. Then, by having that discipline, it actually leads us on to the next question, which is that we will be able to gain better insights from the data we actually collect because we had an idea already of why we are collecting it. And that's where the better insights can come, and that's where we can have greater opportunities for improving our services. Now, the challenge for data protection in this whole area is that data protection laws are crafted in an era where it was assumed that there will be a computer-human interface where you are able to present a consent clause that you can read through, click off, and say that I understand that it's collected for this purpose. But for many of the devices, sometimes the device is paired with an application on your mobile phone or even an online service. You have a chance to get consent. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can just use the device on its own without having to interact too much with an interface. So how do we overcome that? we are looking deep and hard in this area, and one of the ideas that we are thinking about is really to say, hey, to make consent meaningful, it needs to be understandable. People need to be able to understand it, right? Perhaps we need to have innovative consent-taking designs like dynamic consent, where if you are running an app or an online service, you have multiple touch points with your customer. Don't take consent, blanket consent one shot. As he uses a new function, ask him for consent about that new function, inform your consumer about what that function is supposed to do and what data is being collected. You get a better relationship.
Do you foresee that happening more in the future?
That's one of those things that
Yeah.
we hope to push. And I think that if you take a look at the mobile phone, right, we are getting there, we're taking steps in that direction as well. As you need certain of the functions, I use an Android phone, so as the app needs certain access to certain functions, it's pop up. I need access to this, do you agree, don't you agree? You can build on that. So that interaction gets you better customer trust. It's a lot more interactive and it's much better consent.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'll cut you a bit short in case you... so David, we talk about big data and then we talk about data breaches. Have there been any big cases of IoT sensors, data that are being hacked and used for malicious purposes?
Right. In fact, there is a lot of references like that, right? I mentioned about the Mirai botnet earlier on. And at the same time, there's also a lot of hackers or white hackers who like to prove that they are really good.
Right.
So there are in cybersecurity shows that we attend, and even there's a lot of YouTube videos over the internet that shows people trying to hack into a car, and they can take control of the latest model was this Jeep Cherokee. Yeah? They were able to use the in-car built application to take control of certain functionalities of the car. You can control the braking system, the steering system, the climate control
That's
system.
quite scary, right? I mean, if you're driving and someone suddenly breaks your car and then you crash. Okay, but I'm more asking about what do you do with the metadata collected from, say, IoT devices?
Right. I believe that if we are able to, like in all good cybersecurity products, right, it's all about collecting the intelligence, storing that intelligence for future users. There are certain uses in cybersecurity for big data. The first one is what we call sensors, yeah? C-E-N-S-U-S. So sensors means if you have seen enough good use of a particular file, you know that when you see that file elsewhere, it's good, right? Or another one is feedback, right? If you've seen a bad use case of one file, you will blacklist it, and when you see it in other IoT devices, you will blacklist the use of that file, or that internet connection, or that IP address.
Right.
If you take it one step back, right? If you sense that a credit card, right, that's being used to register an IoT device has been used for nefarious purposes. When that credit card has been used to buy other IoT devices, you can also have a weighting on how bad it could be. So intelligence like this now we have to collect very differently. Previously, we were collecting all this intelligence from computers, from mobile devices such as Android and iOS devices. But now with IoT in the picture, sensors, prevalence, and whitelist and blacklist, we have to collect from a lot more devices across a lot more platforms, across a lot more network protocols. It's just gotten a lot more complicated actually, but it's a necessity. So the collection of the big data is very important for future defense.
Okay, because we're running out of time, let's just, I mean, it's been quite I don't know, it sounds very scary, right? We have a lot of issues with IoT data, privacy. Okay, how about the last question? Let's make it a little more positive. Tell me what's the one optimistic thing that you look forward to in an IoT connected world?
So if I were to think about IoT, I'll probably answer it slightly differently.
Okay.
I hope that's okay. So one of the things that we as BAE Systems are doing, particularly here in Singapore at the moment, is we're working very closely with the Singapore government to try to help sort of boosting the understanding of cybersecurity and raise that awareness. So when we walk out and try to offer a huge platform for a customer, let's say for SP Power, for instance, for them protecting their infrastructure, what we would do, we would look at that and we would say there are local flavors of that. How can we use local startups and small companies with that innovative thinking? Because we are we're a very big company. BAE Systems is more than 80,000 employees, and it's a big tanker to maneuver around. So we would pull in these more agile small companies as well as the education sector and try to bring those pieces together to gap close the things that has that local flavor to it. I think that's what's exciting about it, and that is how we can be more comfortable and how governments around the world can be more comfortable about actually using the IoT to make sure that everything just works better for everyone. It serves a national purpose.
Right. And Joanna?
Oh, I think IoT is extremely exciting. So my title is Architecture Manager, but my secret title is Chief Daydreamer. So basically, there's just so many applications out there for IoT. And for example, like what he has mentioned, it's like we're working with many startups in the local space, in the APAC space, to create all these new applications out there. And I have various projects we'll be launching also in Singapore this year. So I think we are just at the beginning. We do see that there is going to be a ramp up of all these new use cases, new applications in the market space, and it's exciting for all of us because eventually, using all these data points, we can have the environment being more smarter and to work for you. The iPhone, for example, I'm a big Apple fan. It's like literally almost the pinnacle of how a consumer device should be. And then we are gradually seeing like, what if all these different surroundings around us, whether it's cars, whether it's buildings, what if, they can also reach that standard? So, we are just at the beginning, so I'm very positive of what's going to come.
Okay. Moving on.
Well, I think my own view of IoT devices is that it's developing a wave of technology that we should embrace and see whether we can benefit from them and see how it can change our lives. We have seen small examples of how your accelerometer can actually give you this little encouragement to take a few more steps, be a bit more active. NFC and even location-based devices can actually tell you you can use it such that in certain zones at home or certain places, those are considered safe zones, and then your security verification may not be so high, right? So it's going to impact and change lives, right? I think that the important thing that we need to do is, as a nation, to understand how we can benefit, be savvy about the technology, and understand how we can adopt it while ensuring that we adopt good practices and safeguards, not only as consumers, but also as businesses.
Okay. Right. And lastly, that you have the honor of giving your opinion.
Well, I always like to, see IoT from its basic perspective. We look upon IoT as a series of consumer devices, but for me, I see IoT as a very big group of computing devices. And if you have computing devices and our computing power today is so good and is able to be compressed in such a small form factor, there's just so many things that we can achieve through computing, for example. And if we are to put that computer onto your watch or onto a device or tack it into a microchip that you can stick onto some medical devices, for example, the possibilities are endless. And of course, once you have endless possibilities, you also have endless avenues and doomsday scenarios that you need to secure against.
Right.
And of course, while our friend from Philips actually is a chief daydreamer, right? Yeah.
Yes, precisely.
I'm like a chief doomsday prophet like that. I'm sorry about that. but I just can't help thinking about the amount of nefarious activities that could take place in all this kind of new applications on IoT devices that we have, and therefore I'm a strong advocate of designing the IoT devices in a secured manner from the perspective of cyber defense. I'm also a strong advocate of designing such IoT devices to ensure data privacy, because there are two forms of data that we need to always secure. Data at rest, which is the data that sits in your IoT devices, and data in motion, which is the data that floats from one IoT devices back to the cloud, or from one IoT device to another IoT devices. And of course, I urge the developers of IoT applications to bear these two kind of data privacy risk, and take measures to mitigate them in their design.
Okay, I guess that's about it time. So I'd like to thank all our panelists. It's been a pleasure. It's somewhat scary and somewhat positive at the same time. But I've enjoyed myself. I hope you guys have as well. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Right.